This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome back to the Weather Lounge. And we are coming to you from our WeatherWorks headquarters located in Hackettstown, New Jersey. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and I would like to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to our podcast. And joining me, as always, across the desk is my co-host, meteorologist Mike Mahalik. Hey there, Mike.
Hey, how you doing, Brad? Good day for you?
Not too bad. Yeah, we're into December already. Hard to believe.
That's true. That's true. And geez, with December, it has me thinking about snow. And it brought back memories of some big blizzards of the past that we always talk about, like the 1993 superstorm and 1996 blizzard. And I always thought, man, 20, 30 years ago, I feel like when these big storms hit, roads were snow-covered, snow-packed, impassable for days. And I feel like there must have been big improvements in the road maintenance industry and the road departments, because I feel like that's almost a thing of the past that you don't really see anymore.
It is. I mean, I you know what, and it's funny you say that, because I mean, I grew up in Central Jersey, and to the dismay of a lot of kids these days, it seems like the roads get cleared a lot fast. I can remember being off from school for like 2 or 3 days from a good snowstorm. But
more. I think in '96 I might have been off for almost a week.
But yeah, I mean, it's true. I think the roads and they clear them down to the blacktop so much faster now, and it's so much different than, like you said, 20, 30 years ago, and everything's up and running again in a day or two.
Mm-hmm.
And the days of running out of milk and bread basically are over, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah, right. It always seems like there's still a group that'll run out before a storm, stock up on supplies, like they're going to be snowed in for 2 weeks or something. But it's not really the case anymore. And I'm sure the road departments have made big advances when it comes to snowstorms, and they're the ones out there working tirelessly. Maybe they need loads of coffee to keep going, but I mean, I've been there. I use loads of coffee right now.
A 12-hour shift to them is like 4 hours for us.
Yeah, right. Now, to give us a little more perspective on this, we do have Ken Budd from Washington DPW in New Jersey to walk us through some of this new technology, some of the treatments they use, strategies that the road crews use in the wintertime. So he'll be able to lay that all out on the advancements of getting rid of that snow in the wintertime. So don't go away. We'll bring in Ken right after the break.
Hey everyone, it's Mike Prianti from the Weather Lounge here, and let me tell you, dehydration is no joke. I went through it myself once, and it's not fun. You get headaches, muscle spasms, cramps, the whole 9 yards. But proper functional hydration is essential for just about everyone. Sometimes, though, water may not be enough, and that's where Liquid IV comes in. They're the #1 powdered hydration brand in America, and their hydration multiplier is something you're most likely missing in your daily routine. You don't even have to be a sports professional to enjoy it either. With just one stick, you can hydrate twice as fast than using water alone. It has 3 times the amount of electrolytes than leading sports drinks, it's made from non-GMO ingredients, and it's chock full of essential vitamins. I personally enjoy the passion fruit flavor, but there are other great refreshing flavors you can choose from as well. So whether you're out landscaping, plowing a parking lot in a snowstorm, heading out for that afternoon jog, or even just feeling run down, Liquid IV is your go-to source for all hydration and wellness. Get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use code WeatherLounge, capital W, capital L, at checkout. That's 20% off anything you order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code WeatherLounge at liquidiv.com.
And welcome back to the Weather Lounge, everyone. Today, we have a guest with us, and his name is Ken Budd. He's the General Supervisor of the Washington Township Department of Public Works. And we had the pleasure of actually visiting Ken and his crew and Roger over there at Washington Township a couple of months ago during our winter seminar. And Mike and I thought it would be a good idea to maybe bring him on to join us here on the podcast and talk about, like Mike was just talking about, also the advancements of where the DPWs and the road crews have come now in the last several years. So Ken, Bud, welcome to the Weather Lounge. How you been?
Thank you for having me. Things are well, and we're in full swing for winter now.
Yeah, I could imagine so. We're into December, and we're going to be just basically going full bore here, probably for the next 4 months. So, just give us a little background of what you do at Washington DPW, and your history, and where you've been before this, how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So I graduated high school in 1995, and my grandfather was a superintendent for another public works department. So I had that exposure, as a child. And it was something that always interested me. So when I graduated high school, I was hired with Washington Township Public Works. And I worked there until 2004 when I was hired by Washington Township. And I've been here ever since.
And of course, this is New Jersey we're talking about. If everyone doesn't Washington, I should have clarified that earlier. Washington Township in New Jersey. So. Which of course, they get a lot of snow up there, and it's that time of the year. I guess, like you said, you got your crews ready to go. I mean, you got your schedules ready, and you're just waiting on when to react. Correct?
That's correct. And actually, we had our moment of realization on Monday when there were some squalls coming through, and Monday morning, everything was 100% ready to go. Just based on the reports that we got. So it's time.
Right. Is that something that happens pretty much every year, Ken, where you start seeing the few flakes and then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, it's go time?
So ideally what you want to do is have everything ready to go sometime in November. We use November 15th as our date, that everything should be 100%. Obviously there's still other projects going on depending on weather. Some years, November 1st, based on the forecast. This year, we were able to get basically through the entire month with nothing. And then, the local forecasts weren't indicating that anything was going on. We did receive the report from you and got everything ready. And we actually did have some coverage up on the mountain. Nothing that needed to be treated, but it was definitely, it definitely was a reminder that it's that time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Ken, I don't. From the intro there, where Brad and I were talking a little bit about, 20, 30 years ago, it seemed like stuff was snow packed on the roads a lot longer. Now, are we seeing changes on your end as far as how you deal with storms? I mean, I'm sure there has to be ways that you deal with it that differ from what you did maybe in the late 90s. So, what's one of the biggest things that has made a change in that time period?
So definitely the use of chemicals. When I first started, obviously I didn't have my CDL the first few winters, so I was just a plow jockey. When things need to be scraped off.
I like that. Plow jockey.
But when I did get into a salt truck, we used a mix of grit and salt, and there was no chemical whatsoever. And it was, maybe 50-50 mix, but it was a light mix. And, you scrape the roads and you put the material down. And like you're saying, we would be leaving from a storm and we're driving on either hard pack or, whatever the plow didn't scrape off, that's what's left. There was definitely a lot more snow tires back then. When you were working on a road, you'd hear them coming. And that's something that you really don't hear anymore. Every once in a while you hear something coming and it's like, what's that? It goes by and it's like, wow, they have snow tires. That's cool.
No, I can remember. I'm gonna age myself too here, but I remember back in the '80s, my parents, like in October, November, they'd say, all right, we're gonna go put the snow tires on the car this weekend, or go get the snow tires put on the car. And I was like, back then I was like, okay, well, and now you don't even hear about that hardly.
So that definitely all changed with when I came to Washington Township. They had a completely different system. They were using pure salt with no grit. and they were using chemical. So it was a big change for me. And we made some advancements since 2004 in in how we, operate. So absolutely, things have definitely changed.
Yeah. So is it more of the pre-treatments, Ken, that have started to change things for getting those pavements, down to blacktop quicker, or explain what goes on there?
Yeah. So in 2004, we were doing no pre-treatments, and that started maybe 10 years ago or so. So we have an interesting setup in our town where we have, we're spread out. We're 45 square miles, and we have a 520-foot difference between the valley and the mountain, the top of the mountain, and it's a very short distance. Our one road that goes through town. That's the difference on that road. So there's definitely a change you can see during the storms with that elevation. But what we do is we used to do a liquid application where we would, drop the material on the road. It wasn't a salt brine. It was more of a mixture of some other components that we purchased. But we would just gravity feed it onto the road, and you would see those lines on the road like you see on the interstates. We did that for a few years, and then we switched over to more of a paste application. We can get into that in a little greater detail, but we still use that application today.
Yeah, not to interrupt you, Ken. You were talking about the stuff you see on the road before a storm. You're talking about the brining, I guess.
That's correct. And what we found with it is the product that we were using, and this is true for some calcium products as well, is if you apply it over a certain temperature, it's actually slippery until it dries. And we just we had mixed results with it. I know I've talked to people from other towns who they mix their own salt brine. That's what they prefer to use. It's all a matter of preference. If you get 20 public works guys in a room, you're going to get 20 different opinions. So we switched over to this paste system. And if you're not familiar with that, what that does is think of a V box. So think of the letter V. The salt would drop out the bottom, and the spinner would be directly underneath that. Well, what the paste machine does, it's that same setup, except there's a trough between the spinner and the drop point. And the trough carries the material to the side of the truck. While it's being carried over, it's being soaked with, we use a liquid calcium. And it's not a true paste, but it creates, a very wet salt. And then when it's spread on the ground, it sticks. And then when the traffic goes over it, it grinds it up and kind of works it into the pavement.
It creates a bond with it, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And I got to say, and Michael concur with me on this. The social media aspect to brining in really anywhere in the Northeast is amazing, because as soon as it's done by anybody, or like this, the state, even out here in Pennsylvania, PennDOT will do it. And they'll say, "Oh my God, look, Route 80 got brined. You know what that means?" Or "Why are they brining today? Why? There's no snow in the forecast. Why are they brining?" It's amazing what you'll see on social media, like on Twitter and Facebook, especially when you do see that kind of stuff, and the response it gets on the comments and stuff like that.
And we get calls even now if we're pre-treating. We'll pre-treat 12 hours before a storm, and it looks like a salt machine. So it's going down the road, it's spreading salt across the road, and people call and say, why are you salting? You're wasting material. And usually you can educate them and they understand, but to somebody who's just not familiar with it, it just looks like you're using extra material.
Right, and I think that's the important thing that we need to know about when you do the pre-treatments, is that pre-treatment that gets worked into the pavement, like you were talking about, basically prevents the snow from bonding to the pavement. Is that correct?
That's the only reason we're doing it, is to create a barrier between the blacktop and the snow. you always want to try to prevent that bond initially, because once the ice is on that blacktop, well, now you have to attack it from the top. And you need to work through the snow or the ice or whatever to get to the blacktop. And at that point, you're just you're going to use extra material. It's more time. It's more dangerous because now you have the cars riding on top of this, this surface. So you always want to try to prevent that initially. And in doing that, once the melt begins, once you go into plowing, you can reapply at a much reduced rate just to keep that brine active, keep it hotter.
Right. And that's why, I just wanted to bring that up, because I want the public to understand that it's not that you're wasting product in any way. It's that you are allowing that snow not to bond to the pavement so that you don't get the hard pack, so that when you do run those plows through, you can get down to blacktop much quicker than you would otherwise. So that's the important thing about the pre-treatments that I'd like everybody to know. You know, because that's the reason why we're not stuck with hard pack for days and days and days afterwards, like we used to be back then. And then if you do have the hard pack, like you said, it's going to take more time. You got to let that salt kind of sit on the snow. It's got to burn through it a little bit, loosen it up, and then you can probably plow it off. I mean, just from my experience in the past doing snow plowing for a landscape.
Mike, were you a plow jockey too?
Yeah,
I know you were.
No, I went to a Holiday Inn Express last night. So no, I used to work for a landscaping company in Eastern Pennsylvania, so I have experience with plowing and salting and things of that nature. Not to the level of Ken here, but I do remember instances when we got called into it was a car dealership, and for some reason their plow guys never showed up, and we were doing the lawn care for the business, and basically it was snow and sleet that had some freezing rain on top of it, so the entire car lot was just a sheet of ice basically. And we had to get that broken up, and we couldn't get the plows under it. So the first thing that we had to do was throw the salt down and let that sit for a little while so it could start working and breaking up that that ice, and then we could start plowing it off. And even that, it was so slippery, Ken. I gotta say, I was driving my plow truck down the one aisle of F-150 trucks, and this isn't an ad for F-150s or anything, but
product placement.
I was driving a 350, whatever. But anyway, so I'm spreading the salt out the back, and I don't even know how slow I was going, creeping down this aisle of that. There was a sheet of ice between all these F-150s. So I try to stop towards the end of the aisle in enough time, but the truck was not stopping. And I'm going, oh God. And I'm looking at a line of trucks in front of me, and I'm like, oh man.
Did you start going sideways too?
No, I didn't go
No?
sideways, but
Okay.
immediately I threw my plow down because I was hoping that
smart.
it would dig in
Yeah.
and stop me. Still wasn't really stopping me, but it slowed me down enough where at the very last, like, I might have had maybe a foot or two before I was going to hit a line of trucks, where it just kind of stopped for me. And I was like, oh.
Does your old boss know about this, Mike? Do I need to email him or?
Maybe not to this extent. I might have said, "Ooh, I had trouble stopping there," but I didn't say to this extent that, "Oh my God, I almost hit 3-4 trucks at the end of that line."
Ken, do you have any stories like that? I mean, that you can share or no?
I mean, I could fill the whole day up with.
I could imagine with as long as you've been there. Yeah.
I mean, in that respect, the way we used to operate is, we knew it was going to snow, and we would wait for the police department to call. If it's going to start at 1:00 in the morning, everyone's asleep. The officers would see it start snowing, make the call. Obviously, we were not pre-treating at that time. So by the time you get the call and you're driving in, there could be an inch of snow, 2 inches of snow on the ground already. So now you're dealing with, trying to get in. If there's an accident or if there's traffic stopping you, that's slowing us down. And then once we get in, getting the trucks out on the ends there, and you're talking, it could be an hour to an hour and a half before the truck's on the road. And in that time, traffic could be packing down whatever material is on the ground, whatever accumulation is on the ground. So it was never really a good situation. And now we try to project when the crews start to eliminate that. Sometimes you get it wrong. And, there's been mornings where we've been here at 4 a.m. and you're looking at, a starry sky, but there's no accidents. Everybody got in safe, and then it's going to start. Maybe it starts a little later than what we anticipated.
Yeah, and that's something that with our storm alert products here at WeatherWorks, and our consultation and our heads up services, that we try our best to keep you guys informed about the situation going on. When that snow is going to arrive, we give you those notifications, an hour or so before, to give you that warning that, hey, snow's going to start in an hour, so that you don't have to wait for the police officer to call you. Or you're late getting in and you already got snowpack on the road. So that's what we do over here at WeatherWorks to assist all you guys at the DPWs, to make sure your job can be smoother and hopefully save you a couple of bucks with, budget and time.
Well, that's something I had never realized when you mentioned budget. When you're out on the road in a truck, you're just trying to get your end clean. You don't want to be the guy to get the call. You want to make sure that but once I came into this position, the budget is a driving force for everything. It all comes down to what the costs are, where we can cut costs, while maintaining an effective, department and keeping that safety out there. So absolutely, everything is budget minded at this point.
So Ken, if we want to talk a little bit more about the de-icers and things like that, I know there's different types of chemicals you may add to the rock salt to allow them to work at different temperatures, because I know once you get below a certain point, rock salt isn't as effective. So what are the kinds of things you use to make it a bit more effective?
So our department, we now use a liquid calcium chloride and mix it with the rock salt. And that gets us down, a much lower temperature. I can remember there was a winter where, it was -4, -5 in the morning. And we had some spots that were freezing over, and we put the product down, and it didn't work as quick as it probably normally would, but as the day went on and temperature came up, it worked. So we haven't really had a need to use anything beyond this liquid calcium. There are other products out there that will, are more effective or will lower the freezing point, but we just haven't had a need for it. We used to use a product, and it's interesting. It was a form of a brine. It was a 30% solution of calcium chloride, sodium chloride, magnesium chloride, and potassium. Okay? And there are agencies that are still using this. It worked, but what we were finding is on our liquid systems, there's little screens to filter the material. And those screens would clog up in the middle of the storm, so that the driver would have to stop, undo the screen, clean it out, and it slowed down the process. And we assume it was because there were so many products in there. Maybe there was some separation occurring, or we never really pinpointed what the actual problem was. And then we moved over to this liquid calcium 2 years ago, and it's been working. It's been working for us. So, and then there's some magnesium products out there, and that'll get you down to, I believe, -17 degrees is what I've read. If you Google this, there's there's so many different charts and graphs and everything. It kind of blows your mind. So
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things going on. I know if you're making a brine solution, also it has to be a certain percentage of the mixture to work most effectively. And there's a lot going on there, other than just saying, just take some water and mix it with salt and we're all good. No, it's got to be just right.
Well, Ken, here's a question. How do you test this stuff out? Like, where do you, like of 10% of this and 15% of this or 20? How do you know what is the right, concoction, if you will?
So as a baseline, we have some worksheets. We obviously calibrate our equipment, so we have some worksheets on how to do so, and you plug the numbers in, and that's a baseline. And some areas, you just don't get the melt off, so you adjust it a little bit. Obviously, the drivers, they want to have ultimate control, so they like to have a little more than what they probably should, just to get them out of certain situations, and that's completely understandable. But we have it set now. So I believe we're using 100 gallons of calcium during a storm to 10 ton of salt. So about 10 gallons per ton. And we've had good results with that. And it works out so that when they come in to refill salt, they're pretty much out of liquid. They can load up their liquid and head back out on their run. But going to the percentages, we visited a couple departments that actually make their own brine. You can purchase it. It's relatively simple to make yourself. We did look into it. I just personally didn't see the advantage of it. You have to purchase the tanks to store it. You have to purchase the vault. It's basically just a big concrete, box to agitate the material, and the pump to circulate everything and pump it into the tanks. The cost just didn't really make sense for what you get for it. Our pasting works pretty well. So, but like you're saying, yeah, if the mentality is, well, I'm just going to add a little more salt to this, make it hotter, and it's going to work better. And that's not the case. It actually will work.
I'm one of those types that would keep on tinkering to try to get it even better. Then I'd screw the whole thing up. I was like, oh man, what did I do here? It just seems like it's so it's so intricate to try to figure out all that stuff. I mean, it's amazing that what you guys do with all that stuff now.
Yeah, and sometimes more isn't always better, right?
Right, exactly.
I mean, if you get it to where it's supposed to be, leave it alone.
Don't fix if it ain't broke, right? Is that the old saying?
And there's so many options available to our departments where you can purchase the salt pre-treated from the vendor. It comes off the truck. It has this bluish tint, or greenish, depending on what you buy. I think it's like $20 more a ton for that. Some departments will actually mix it themselves, where they'll lay it out on the lawn, or on the yard, spray it down with a hose, mix it with their machines, and push it up to save some money. There's blanket sprayers where you load the truck with the salt, and then you drive underneath this tube, and it just basically drenches the salt in the truck. So there's so many different options, and like I said, a lot of it's just a matter of what you prefer.
So let's shift gears a little bit, Ken, and we asked this to a lot of our people in the snow and ice industry that we have on the podcast, but what are some of your biggest concerns when it comes to a snowstorm? What is the couple of key components that you're looking at? Is it start time, amounts, intensity, temperature? There's a bunch of different things.
Yeah, so a lot of times we're looking at the end of the storm first and working back from that.
Right, and staffing wise, I would imagine so too.
Absolutely. So our department utilizes 2 crews, and ideally you want both crews on at the tail end of the storm for cleanup, so that as soon as the storm's done, we can get it done as quick as possible. So we'll look at the ending time. We will look at the amounts, but once you get over 3 inches, you're plowing. So 3 inches or 30 inches, it's the same process. It's just how long is it going to, take? Obviously, the duration of the storm. And then the start time is when we would, try to figure out when to send the crew home for rest and when to get the other crew in to start before it actually comes down.
Right, because I'm sure you probably have limits on how long a particular crew can be out in the storm, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Now I don't know. Some people have different limits. I don't know if you want to say what yours is, but
Absolutely. Because so the limit that we have in the union contract is 20 hours max with an 8-hour rest period. What we found is in terms of coverage is if you have 16 hours on, 8 hours off, and then you stagger that. So the second half of that 16 hours, that first crew is on their first 8 hours. You're going to have 24-hour coverage for the entire winter if needed. If it snowed for 3 days straight, you're always going to have coverage. You don't have to worry about it, a gap of a few hours. So 16 on and 8 off has worked out very well for us.
yeah, that's good that you have those. Back in my plowing days, it was a little bit different, where they just said, "Okay, go out till the job's done." And I had a 24-hour strip mall area that I was constantly keeping open. I had to keep the roads open all the time, and yeah, I mean, 24 plus hours out there plowing, salting.
There are still towns that do that. And, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, hey guys, come in, you get a few hours rest on a cot, inside the building. And then 4 a.m., you're back out at it. Plenty of towns are still doing that. We're just fortunate enough to have this backing to allow us to.
Yeah, I mean that's way better as far as safety is concerned and your employees and keeping them fresh because I know there's once you get beyond a certain point, there's just no amount of coffee or anything that can keep you going. You just have to just pull around the back of the site or something like that and take a break for an hour or two.
Because my first winter with Washington Township, my old town, like you're saying, you were there 30 hours. You got called the first flake, and you didn't go home until it was done. So you were, 2-3 days you're at work. And my first winter here, it was the middle of a storm, and they're like, "All right, see you in 8 hours," and just going home, having a hot shower, having a hot meal, and even if it's 4 hours of sleep in your own bed, what a difference that made! World of difference.
Absolutely. And then you go back home, and this is what happened to me one time where I laid down in bed and I said, "Oh, thank God, I'm finally done." And pretty soon my phone rings about 5 minutes later, like, "Hey, you got to go over to this warehouse and plow out the loading dock because they're having a lot of trouble." And I'm like, "Oh man." Just when I thought I was out, it's like the movie quote. Just when I thought I was out, they bring me back in, you know. And I think that was The Godfather. Um, but yeah, I mean that's something that, man, not something I always enjoyed about being on the plow side of things. Um, but so we talked about your snowstorms, what your most important things are there. How does it change when it comes to ice storms? I know when I say ice storms, it seems like a lot of our snow and ice industry clients seem to kind of shudder a little bit.
Yeah, you never want to see ice in a forecast. So we actually do maintain a stock of grit just in case. Grit serves no melting purposes. You can saturate it in calcium all you want. It's not going to melt anything.
Like my parents when they used to throw down kitty litter on the driveway.
Right. So if we do get ice, you always hope there's snow before it. Leave the snow on the road. Let the ice accumulate on top. Once it's passed, you scrape it off. If you do get some compaction from traffic, it's easier to deal with a little bit of that than, scraping the snow off, having the ice come down. Once it starts, freezing rain is a completely different animal. But once you start getting that moisture on the pavement, regardless of how much brine you have, it dilutes that, and then basically you're just playing catch up, and we don't have enough material to address it for the entire storm. So,
and that's a question that we actually get a lot in the wintertime from our clients is, can I pre-treat this? And if it's a rain changing the snow event, unfortunately you can't, because even if you are going to get ice in between, which is usually the transition phase, whether you're going from rain to snow or snow to rain, it's, you just can't pre-treat with, we're going to get rain for a couple hours, but then the front goes through and we're going to change the snow at some point, and there'll probably be some ice in between, but can't do anything about it, and just kind of wait until the change is over, and then you have to do from that point.
And timing is always critical in those circumstances, because you're going to have traffic. If it's clear in the morning, everyone goes to work, and you're going to have heavy traffic, between 5 and 7, and you're trying to maintain your main roads, but you're losing your side roads if you're focusing all your attention on that. So it's a very delicate balance between keeping everything covered, keeping the public safe.
You mentioned the diluting factor when it comes to the ice storms. It just seems like that has got to be just material. I'm trying to think of the right word here, but it's just sucking through your material so much, and you just running through it gets diluted. You retreat, you run through it again. It just seems like those type of storms are not a very good situation when it comes to the road department.
No, and so when you're in a truck, you could see, if you follow a car and there's, a couple inches of snow, if you see their tire tracks kind of pushing off the material, I don't want to say splashing, but you'll see it kind of moving off to the side. You still have, a good solution underneath that. If you see the product or the snow sticking to the tires and kind of flicking up behind them, that's when it's starting to stick to the blacktop. That's just kind of, it's not a textbook or anything, but that's kind of, a gauge. So in that instance, if you're scraping everything off, you would just, like I said, just 50% of what it would be, heat up that solution once again, and you should be good for a while.
Now it seems like we're going through a lot of tough scenarios here with ice and the timing, the long storm. What is I don't mean to make this make light of it, because you guys do an amazing job in the roads. But what's like an easy snowstorm for you guys? Just to kind of think of more of a positive thing.
So it's funny, in the 90s, you didn't plow until there was 3 inches of snow.
Right.
And if there was 2 inches, like, put your stuff down, it's going to melt tomorrow. Don't worry about it. And that has shifted tremendously, where the expectation now is, if the roads aren't black 4 or 5 hours after the storm, you're doing something wrong.
Right. Like the tolerance to today is so.
So, I mean, for us, the ideal situation is, you're getting an inch or two, you go out, treat it with material, and it melts off. That's nice. Once you get to plowing, it's obviously more time. It's tough on the equipment. It beats up the roads. It's a completely different animal.
So when it comes to plowing, Ken, is there any, I know some of our snow and ice contractors who are more in the private industry might have like parking lots and things like that they have to bring out heavy equipment like loaders and things like that to pile the snow and take it somewhere else. Is there ever really a situation where you get into that, or is it just, mainly just pushing it to the sides of the roadways?
So if we have, storm after storm, if we have 3 or 4 storms in the course of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and there's no melt off between those, that's when we'll go out and we'll start pushing the intersections back, moving snow in cul-de-sacs to make room for the next storm. If we have a 12-inch storm, that's when you start getting a lot of that buildup, and then you get into sight distance issues at the intersections. So we'll send a day or two out, after we'll send some machines out to push those areas back.
Yeah, I mean, I was just curious how much of a concern that was for you guys, but it seems like you just need multiple storms, which we haven't really seen lately. So hopefully, that changes a little bit. I mean, maybe not. Maybe you're not looking for that type of stuff. But the snow geese and people who love snow always want to see a good stretch of a lot of snowstorms. But it's not for everybody.
Sure.
But one thing that we've noticed a few times, this is kind of circling back to brining before things happening and people asking questions. And this actually happened in Connecticut a few times for us, where something called pavement frost would form. So basically, frost that would be on your car or on grasses or rooftops actually forms on the roadways. And here at WeatherWorks, we do our best to try to forecast that for road departments, that may cause a problem on bridges and things like that. And we have them typically go out and, well, it's their decision, but they go out and typically brine these areas that are sensitive, and then they end up with no problems. So is that something that you've encountered at all over in Washington, DPW, or?
We have. I always kind of attributed it to our elevation. It's definitely prevalent in certain areas. But yes, we have seen that where there it's a moisture, and it kind of, you just see like a little bit of a glaze, and it's definitely slick. We've also seen forecasts come in where we have freezing fog. That was a new one for me, and that was interesting. But it happened. It happened.
Yeah. And basically what you have is you have fog that's occurring below 32 degrees, and if that fog is thick enough, it could start making some slick conditions on the roadways. And it usually takes that thick fog to hang around for several hours before we're really having any issues from it. But it seems like maybe I just wasn't aware of it without starting to work here at WeatherWorks, but I never really thought about, uh, freezing fog and pavement frost and things of that nature.
Well, yeah, the pavement frost. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the sneakiest one I think of all, if you want to call it that. It's just because it's usually when you come off of a very cold period of weather, and you get that little bit of moisture advection, like Ken was just talking about. It could be anything. It could just be dew points going up 10 degrees. You know, but yet your temperatures are still in the teens to 20s, and but if that dew point's coming up to meet the temperature, yeah, it's not going to precipitate or anything, but there's that moisture advection, that increase in moisture, and with temperatures still well below freezing, you get that glaze, as Ken said, and it could be clear as a bell. Where does ice come from? And we've dealt with that too, Mike, like you said, at WeatherWorks, and something we will send something out for it even the night before sometimes to prep folks the next day if we think it's going to happen.
And I'm sure pavement temperature plays into that.
Correct. Absolutely.
100%.
And on Monday, when we had our our squalls coming through, we don't have a truck mounted temperature monitor anymore. I use when COVID was going on, we had those handheld infrared thermometers.
Oh, right.
I'm using one of these that we use for automotive repair, or if you're looking at HVAC stuff. And I went out on Monday, and all the shaded areas were the temperature on the pavement was 33 degrees, and out in the sunny areas it was 37 degrees. Well, as soon as those squalls started, the shaded areas covered up immediately, and during the squall, the 37 degree areas were melting off right away. And as soon as the snow stopped, the shaded areas, it took a little while, but they slowly melted off on their own. But I mean, there was a big difference in pavement temperature, but it was so noticeable with the coverage.
Well, you see that a lot too, and I'm sure you've seen it plenty of times, Ken, with overpasses and bridges. I mean, and we see it every winter where the roadway, like the main part of the road before the bridge or after the bridge is just wet, but then right over the bridge itself, it's covered. And it, a lot of drivers may not be able to adjust that fast. If they get on the bridge, like, oh my gosh, it's snow covered, it's icy, and it's too late at that point.
Absolutely. Yep.
I just wanted to circle back quickly to the pavement frost thing, because I just want to make sure that everybody understands how it happens. And Brad, I think you did a pretty good job explaining. But that's what we are looking for. We're looking for a stretch of very cold weather, followed by an increase of moisture and an increase of temperatures at the same time, but still below freezing. So that's what's going on, and you can almost liken it to maybe if you had a glass or something in the freezer, and then you take it out of the freezer. Well, what happens? Well, the frost starts forming on the outside of the glass because it's hitting more moisture and all of that going on there. So that's kind of what's happening to the roadways, because the roadways are really cold. You get that extra moisture and a little extra warmth in there, so you get the frost to start to form. And that's what's happening. And if you're not treated for that, a lot of times a pre-treatment or something will take care of it, but it can get slick. I can remember a time where there was a ton of accidents on the LIE in Long Island, in a pavement frost situation. And fortunately, we were ahead of that, and we informed our clients in Connecticut about it, and there was no accidents, or hardly any, I should say, because they went out to their bridges and they pre-treated things, and those shaded areas like you were talking about, Ken, they pre-treated things, and that prevented any pavement frost from forming. So that was one instance where, man, it was really, well, it wasn't great that there was accidents on Long Island. I mean, let's be real. But it was interesting to see that being proactive like that and staying ahead of it and being informed actually saved a ton of problems for people. So it's quite an interesting phenomena. Um, One that I never really thought of before working here at WeatherWorks. But we're always concerned about how we can help our clients and how we can keep them ahead of the storms. And so, you know, we're thinking about a million things at once, trying to get you guys the best information to make that decision easier for you. And that is interesting, Ken. You're talking about the shaded areas too, because there's a lot of times where I'm sure you've seen this before, Ken, where it might be actually above the freezing mark, but you're still getting ice forming. And what's happening there is a lot of times you'll have the air temperature that's measured at 4 to 6 feet or something like that above the ground surface, because that's where we are kind of hanging out as humans. That's where we want to know what the temperature is, what our height is. So we measure the temperature there might be 35 degrees, but the temperature very close to the ground on a clear, cold night with no wind might be closer to 32, or those pavements could be even running colder than that. So if you have water down there, what's going to happen? Well, at the surface, you're going to get some black ice forming, but you're taking a reading up here at 4 to 6 feet, that's 35 degrees. So it's interesting, all of those.
Sometimes the snowpack will help too with that, Mike. Even if you have a couple inches of snow on the ground itself, it'll refrigerate that lower foot right at the surface versus, like you said, where we're standing, a couple feet higher.
So yeah, a lot of different situations, and the opposite happens too. When you have it below freezing during the day, and you get sunlight into the pavements, well, what happens? Well, the sunlight doesn't warm the air much, but it'll warm that blacktop better and allow things to melt back. So yeah, it's quite interesting how these things go down. And Ken, I mean, I really do appreciate what you guys do for all the road departments out there, for your road departments in general, and keeping those clears for all the commuters.
Sure, it's a labor of love.
Right.
I have a question for you guys.
Okay, go for it.
So all the old timers used to say, it's too cold to snow. There's really 15 degrees and the air's really dry. And they'd say, well, the only good thing is it's too cold to snow.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Well,
Usually it's humidity, right?
yeah, well, it's not really a true statement. So it's kind of like a half truth, right? Because, okay, when it's really cold outside and it's 9 degrees, 10 degrees, whatever,
Usually dry as hell.
typically, yeah, it's really dry in that air mass, at least here in the Northeast. So, yeah, I mean, 9 times out of 10, if it's that cold, it's not going to snow because you have high pressure overhead and there's really no chance of a storm. But, in reality, it's never really too cold to snow because I've been in forecast situations up in New England when they were 8, 9 degrees and they were snowing. So yeah, I mean, it certainly can happen. It's just that most times when it gets that cold, uh, we have high pressure
You have
overhead,
fair weather, right?
dry air, and we're not really seeing anything happen. But yeah, it's basically it's an old wives' tale kind of thing. Has some truth in it, but it's not as with most things, weather. It's not a 100%. Put a stamp on it. It's not going to happen kind of thing.
Yeah, but Virgo's a kind of a good example, not a good example, but it's and Ken, you could probably relate to this. I'm sure you have a radar app somewhere on your phone, and you look at your radar app, and it may be like 25 degrees out, and it's cloudy, but dew points are down in the low teens, and you see like precipitation over you. And it's like, why isn't it snowing? Well, that's kind of the reason. It's too dry to reach the ground. Now it may snow an hour or two after the atmosphere can saturate enough to and then you get the flakes all the way down the ground. But that's kind of like the example of that when it's just so dry and it takes a while for that precipitation to actually reach the ground.
Coming into this position, when you're out on the road, you're looking at your phone. You're saying, okay, it's supposed to do this at this time, and you're looking at the radar and when's it going to be out of here. And now that I'm kind of diving more into the weather aspect of it, it's actually interesting. I believe Rob did a lecture for our professional association, and he explained the way the radar works and how it, as it travels out, it's actually going at a higher elevation. So 100 miles out, you're
Yeah, the radar beam, because there's main radars. I mean, there's some airport radars that aren't as powerful as the ones that are typically used at the Weather Service offices, and those are the big ones. And the ones that we're surrounded by is the one in Binghamton. You got the one down in Mount Holly in New Jersey, and then you got one all the way out in Long Island, which is the National Weather Service in New York. So, and unfortunately, we're kind of all in between all of that area. So the beam itself from all those radar sites are usually pretty high. I mean, granted, the Mount Holly one's the closest, and you can still see snow, of course, on radar, but the beam itself is probably already a good, 5,000-6,000 feet above you by the time it gets here. So, and it could be, you're right, it could be snowing above your head, not reaching the ground yet, and that's why we call it Virga.
Yeah, but he brings up a good point because you could see that at times where, you are overshooting the snow showers
Oh, that's the other
coming
point.
in.
Yeah, you're right, Mike.
So I've been in situations where I'm watching a streamer of snow showers coming through upstate New York. It looks like, okay, well, it must just be stopping in the Poconos. And then all of a sudden, you'll start seeing the extension of that snow shower showing up on the Mount Holly radar in New Jersey. And you go, oh, wait a minute. We're just losing it in
It's
between
basically
the
just
two
the opposite,
radars.
right? The snow squall or the snow shower itself
It's
is below the radar beam to the point where the radar's not picking it up, but yet there it
right.
is.
And this is where you have to be cognizant of that. And you have to look at your satellite picture and note that, hey, that cloud stream is still there. Even though it's disappearing on the radar, the clouds are there. So that means the snow shower is holding together. So so you can't always trust what the radar
And
is
sure enough, you
telling
go
you.
to a camera where you see that cloud band on the IR satellite, and voila, you got it's snowing like crazy. a certain part of the camera.
So Ken, I appreciate the questions you're asking. Do you have any more questions weather-wise before we wrap this thing up? Because hey, we've been hitting you with questions. Why not get us, right?
I'm sure I will have more at some point, and I definitely know who to reach out to.
Perfect. Well, again, Ken, I do appreciate you being on the Weather Lounge podcast with us today. It's been great getting your insight on the road department and how you deal with winter storms. So thanks again for being here with us.
I appreciate you having me.
All right. And that's it for our Weather Lounge podcast for this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks to have another episode for you guys. So be sure to visit back and also find WeatherWorks at weatherworksinc.com. That's our parent company. And find WeatherWorks on all the social media channels. You can find everything from us there too. So thanks again for everybody listening. And hey, don't be afraid to leave us a review of the podcast. It helps push everything forward for us. So thanks a lot, everybody, and we'll see you soon.